So Corrections Corporation of America, which is one of the largest for-profit prison companies in the United States, has actually done an investor meeting. And what they wanted to do is convince investors that they are making the right choice in investing money into their company. Now, during this presentation, they talked about the state of the economy and how a bad economy equals more profits for people who invest in these private prisons, because bad economy usually equals more crime. You'll see more theft. You'll see people who do things out of desperation. And, you know, the for-profit industry is saying, hey, this is great. Okay, what other industry can you invest in that's actually going to make you money when the economy experiences a downturn? So these horrible people are looking forward to the demise of the country because their investors make money, they make money, they push tough on crime legislation. CCA and people who work for CCA are the scum of this planet.
Right. And what they also do is they create this environment where, like, if you buy stock in Ford Motor Company, right? You hear that American cars are selling. You hear that a Ford sold. Oh, that's great. If you buy stock in CCA, you hear someone's arrested and you're excited. Yeah,
you hear that a non-violent drug offender is going to serve 10 years in prison.
Or an illegal immigrant. And it's like, oh, that's great. That's great for my, my wallet, for my back pocket.
It's sick. It makes me disgusted. And look, there are so many downfalls to these for-profit prisons. And, just to give you an example of it, there was a documentary done by Kevin Booth, and the name of the documentary was American Drug War, because, the drug war has a lot to do with these private prisons and how they profit. And I want to show you guys a little snippet of his documentary, because I really think it's nicely done. And it just gives you a bit of an example of how these for-profit prisons take advantage of bankrupt cities. Let's watch.
Not far from Bakersfield, California is the small town of Taft, once home to a thriving oil industry. But like so many oil towns across America, the oil finally dried up. Like many bankrupt towns, a private prison stepped in to save the day. The Taft Correctional Institution is owned by the Geo Group, formerly known as Wackenhut. Wackenhut changed its name after a storm of bad publicity.
The Geo Group is the leader in providing diversified services to government agencies around the globe. Our global expertise in outsourcing includes the design, construction, financing, management, and operation of jails, prisons, and special purpose institutions, and immigration and detention centers.
They trade their stock on Wall Street based upon the number of people that are in jail. If that isn't sick, if that isn't the best definition of sickness in a society, in a culture, in a civilization, I can't tell you what.
What's the name of that documentary?
The name of the documentary is American Drug War, and again, it was created by filmmaker Kevin Booth. You guys should all check it out. There's snippets of it on YouTube if you want to.
It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. I think he did an excellent job. And what's really interesting, and tell me if I'm being too hard on MSNBC here, right? Every weekend, MSNBC on a loop plays this or shows this lockup, right? And really, you're gonna exploit the horrible conditions that some of these inmates are, experiencing, rather than talking about the issue with for-profit prisons in this country. I'm sure Rachel Maddow at some point has talked about it. I don't want to, make a blanket statement about MSNBC, but I feel like this is one of those issues that's being ignored.
It's underreported if it's reported at all. I mean, this is, and it was encapsulated in what that guy said at the end of that clip or snippet, was that the idea that this company does well when prison population goes up is sickening. That being said, I love Lockup. I watch Lockup, and I don't want them to take it off the air. I think they should, but Anna's right. There should be a balance in the way they report it. They're gonna show what prison life is like, but they're not talking about why prison, why there's so many prisoners. They're not talking about why the war on drugs is profiting to some people, and as opposed, I mean, we know that, but we don't know it as it directly correlates to the prison population. I think that you're 100% right.
One more thing about CCA's presentation. A few months ago, Cenk and I were talking about the recidivism rate here in the United States, and we have a very high recidivism rate. And CCA's presentation touched on that. In fact, not only touched on that, they emphasized that.
They love recidivism's great for business. They
Definitely.
love recidivism.
So they're like, hey, investors, look at all the people who go to jail, get out, and then they come back.
Well, but
it's great.
That's great. But that's the other part of it. No, this is a really important part. I mean, if prison in America is rehabilitative, and that's what we want prison to be in the United States, and that's sort of the starting point. I mean, you want people to get better, you want people to learn how to be part of society, you want to let them out and flourish in society. Their prisons then are doing an inadequate or a conflict of interest job. Because if I own a private prison and I'm going to make money, if I'm like these people, I'm going to make money by having them back, I'm not going to push the rehabilitation so hard.
Of course.
I'm not going to push that education so hard. So it's a double, I mean, it's like a double impacted here. And that's, I mean, that's not just an afterthought. I'm glad you said that. That's really true. I mean, that's a big part of it.
So in Florida, they are considering greatly expanding their private prisons, turning public prisons into private prisons, so that these corporations, some of which that are based in Florida, will make more money. Now, they say, of course, it's to save money, but we'll get to whether that's true in a second. First of all, they want to privatize every state prison south of Orlando. That's 30 facilities, and that would be at least 20% of the state's correctional system. And Chris Kirkham has an excellent article about this in Huffington Post, and you can read for yourself what's happening there. Now, private prisons claim that they do things at a lower cost. But one of the ways that they do that is they cherry pick the prisons. So they get the prisoners with the best health records, okay, at least on average, right? So they leave behind to the public the sickest prisoners, or the prisons with the sickest prison population on average, and they go, yeah, you guys take care of those, and we'll take care of the healthy ones so that our medical bills are lower. And then they turn around and brag and go, oh, you see that? Well, we cost less. Yeah, that's because you did cherry picking. And besides which, you don't even cost less despite that. And then here's another way that they cherry pick. They look at which prisons pose the least amount of violence, because that also will keep their costs down. And they say, all right, the ones that are the most violent, I'll leave to the public, and then go, oh, look at that, the public can't take care of it right. Well, how do they get away with all this cherry picking, et cetera, and playing with the numbers? Well, they buy the politicians. And of course, mainly the Republican Party. The private prison industry has contributed more than $1.4 million to Florida's Republican Party just in the last couple of years. And that's just contributions to the Republican Party. They've also spent millions lobbying key lawmakers in the state. In fact, let me give you more numbers. In just the last 3 election cycles, the political action committees, the executives, and their spouses at for-profit prison companies have donated nearly $1.8 million to Florida candidates and committees. So the money just keeps pouring in. In fact, the Florida Republican Party over the last decade has been the largest recipient of campaign money from GEO Group and Correction Corporations of America, the 2 largest private prison companies in the country. In fact, GEO is based in Florida, and they are lobbying ad nauseum and giving money ad nauseum to the Republican Party so that when they get in office, they'll give them these contracts. And they're not hiding it. When they talk to investors, both the CEO of the GEO Group and of Corrections Corp have bragged about how this is the largest procurement contract in the industry's history, and that it is, quote, an opportunity that is unprecedented and must be aggressively pursued. And how they pursue it? They pursue it by giving all the money to the politicians so they'll get to pick the prisons that are the least problematic, that they can make the most amount of money from. Now, does it actually work that, in fact, these private prisons are less costly? Well, one, stuff we know indicates that's not true. Number 2, there's a lot we don't know, because in 2005, they were supposed to do a report. The State Inspector General's office was supposed to get a report from the private prisons telling us whether they cost less, because that was the last time they tricked Florida into doing private prisons. They said, oh, don't worry. We're going to give you very detailed reports on how much it costs, and we're going to show you that it costs less than public prisons. Where's that report? No, I don't know. They don't have it. What? you ask the state, but wait a minute, we're about to vote on this thing. Where's the report? Conveniently, we couldn't find it. In other words, either A, they're like, we're not going to do any damn report, or they did a report and it was a disaster, and it turns out they cost more than public prisons, so they buried it. So even a Republican, now this is a Republican that's opposed to the private prisons, but it's Paula Dockery. She says, quote, they have not done any true fiscal analysis on it, and I think it's really an embarrassment. Well, how about other states then, if we can't find the numbers from Florida? In Arizona, there was a 2010 report from the state's Auditor General, and it found out, shockingly enough, that state spent more per inmate in private prisons than in public prisons. Let's all say it together. Of course! And by the way, as if all of this wasn't evidence enough and proof enough, there's another little trick that they do to try to pretend, at least in the short run, that private prisons cost less. What they do is, as soon as they get in charge of a prison, they fire all of the workers. Because remember, these prisons exist. They're taking charge of prisons that already have all those prison guards. They fire all the prison guards. And then they say to them, okay, we will rehire you as long as, one, you work at less money, but mainly, we want to wipe out your pensions. We don't want to give you pensions anymore. Now, the guys already have the job. A lot of them are forced into taking it because they don't want to be unemployed in this terrible market, especially in Florida. So then they turn around and go, see, we hired people at a lower cost. Yeah, that's because you saved money not by any kind of efficiency. You saved money by, destroying the pensions of those workers who are at least had something, that they could plan towards retirement towards. You save money by crushing the average guy again, and you put the money in your pocket. And then in the end, it didn't even come to us anyway. You buried the report in Florida, and in Arizona, it turns out you cost more. And you took it out of taxpayers, and where did the money go? Of course, to executives who get paid millions of dollars. Well, they were smart enough, I guess, to do an investment into buying politicians. Unfortunately, best investment you could make in America.
Corrections Corporation of America is one of the largest for-profit prison companies in the United States, and they just recently sent out a letter to 48 states in the U.S. asking for a 20-year management contract so they can take over all of these public prisons and manage them while making tremendous profits, right? So this is a completely different strategy that the for-profit prisons in the U.S. are using. And what's really interesting is that the contract that they want these states to sign would ensure that the prison population is full at least up to 90%.
Think about how dangerous that is. Okay, now it's one thing when you're trying to decide, hey, should we build a public prison or a private prison? I think private prisons are absolutely the wrong way to go because it creates a wrong incentive structure to put more people in prison. But then second of all, they want to take over the public prisons that already exist. That's dangerous, and we've told you about how many millions they spent lobbying the Florida Republicans to make sure that that happens, right? And then the third layer of this is where it goes way over the top. They want a guarantee of the number of prisoners. So what happens if not enough people are committing crimes? In order to keep the prisons at 90% full, we have to go arrest people anyway? And by the way, you think it's not going to happen? It literally happens. You know who wrote SB 1070?
GEO Group and Correction Corporations of America, the two largest for-profit prison companies in the U.S.
SB 1070, of course, was the law in Arizona that discriminated against immigrants and asked them for their papers just based on who they look like, right? So that they could imprison them. And it was the private prisons who wanted to imprison more Latinos on the chance that they might be illegal immigrants. Can you see the wrong incentive structure here? We're letting them buy our politicians, write their laws for them, so that whether you're guilty or innocent, they keep those prisons full. It's sick. That's why you can't have private prisons. That's a core government function. You think it won't happen with the cops? Wait, right? And it doesn't matter. What's happening with the prisons already is atrocious.
Yes, you're totally right about that. And what you mentioned is the #1 problem with this system. But also keep in mind that the way these private prison companies try to convince state legislators to privatize the prison system is because they claim that it saves costs, okay? It saves money and the state will spend less on imprisoning people, right? That is actually not the case. And I don't think that the media focuses on this aspect of the story enough. We have several case studies to look at. There's Arizona, there's Ohio. Both states have privatized their prison system in some way, right? Not the entire system, but they have. And there have been studies to see whether or not that this has actually saved the state money. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't, because these private prisons cherry pick their prisoners, right? So if a prisoner has mental health issues, if a prisoner has physical issues, if that person is going to cost a lot in health care, they will allow the state prisons to take those prisoners. And those are the expensive prisoners. At the same time, they keep all the healthy prisoners. They don't have to pay all the health costs. It's not that big of an issue. The state still funds these private prisons. That's where they get their revenue from. It's not like the money comes out of thin air. So I don't even know why they're considered private prisons.
You know, whenever they have the private and the public competing in any industry, private corporations logically always cherry pick the clients that they want. So, for example, when they allowed private companies to compete in Medicare, what they did was they cherry picked all the healthy people and gave them insurance, right? And that left the state with the unhealthiest senior citizens, and that proved to be more costly. And then they turn around and go, ha ha, you see that? We're cheaper. But in the end, that didn't happen anyway. What wound up happening is they wound up charging more because they're too greedy. They can't help themselves, and they want more compensation. In the private prison case, the same exact thing happens. And then additionally, what they do is the only way that they save costs is that they say, all of you prison guards who were already working here when it was government run, well, now you work here, except we're wiping out your pensions.
Totally. You're totally right about that.
And then they say, okay, well, see, I just saved costs. Yeah, well, you did it by, basically dumping on the average worker there and by punishing them. Now, in the end, do we pay less? No. Why? Because they can't help themselves. They're greedy, and they wind up paying their executives so much money that it wipes out the gains from screwing over the average worker at these prisons and the cherry picking, and we wind up paying more anyway. And the central problem here, unfortunately, is the same as every issue we cover. None of this would happen if we had representatives who actually represented us, right? But they don't give a damn about the voters. What they care about is what gets them elected, lobbyist money. In this case, the private prisons give them a lot of money, millions of dollars to the Florida Republican Party. You think they're doing that for their health? No, they're doing it so they can manipulate the system to their advantage.